Hey there! Tonight we're diving into the world of legendary creatures, the dragons, spirits, monsters, and guardians that have captivated human imagination across every corner of the globe. These beings reveal how cultures make sense of the unknown, encode moral lessons, and preserve memories stretching back thousands of years. Do consider tapping or clicking on the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if this sparked a little calm or curiosity. No pressure, only if your finger feels like doing it. Now settle into comfort, let your mind and body relax, and let's explore tonight's topic together. 1. Dragons in Chinese tradition are commonly benevolent symbols of authority, reign, and wisdom, while in much of medieval Europe, dragons were often pictured as greedy, fire-breathing adversaries to knights. This fundamental split reflects different cultural anxieties and values. In China, where agriculture depended on seasonal monsoons, dragons became associated with water, clouds, and imperial power. They brought life-giving rain and symbolized the emperor's divine mandate. European dragons, by contrast, emerged in a landscape of castles, treasure hoards, and Christian allegory, where the dragon represented chaos, greed, and paganism that heroic knights had to overcome. The difference isn't just aesthetic, it's philosophical. One culture saw dragons as partners in cosmic order, the other saw them as obstacles to be conquered. Both traditions have shaped art, literature, and national identity for centuries, and the contrast reminds us that even our monsters are mirrors of what we value and fear. 2. The Kraken legend from Norse sailors likely grew from real encounters with giant squids, creatures that can reach lengths rivaling a school bus. Imagine sailing across open ocean in a wooden vessel, and suddenly tentacles longer than your entire ship emerge from the depths. For centuries, sailors returned with stories of massive, many-armed beasts that could drag entire ships underwater. Modern marine biology has confirmed that giant squids can grow over 40 feet long, with eyes the size of dinner plates and sucker-covered arms capable of grappling with sperm whales in deep-sea battles. These creatures live in the ocean's darkest zones, rarely seen by humans. When dead or dying specimens washed ashore or surfaced near ships, terrified sailors had no scientific framework to understand them. The Kraken became the name for that primal fear of the deep, a creature so large and alien it could only be mythology. Except it wasn't. The monster was real. We just didn't have the tools to see it clearly until recently. 3. Medieval Europeans treated the unicorn as a symbol of purity so seriously that royal hunting tapestries and unicorn hunts became commonplace decorative motifs. Some rulers even claimed to own tusks later identified as narwhal horn. The unicorn occupied a strange space between bestiary fantasy and believed reality. Tapestries showed elaborate hunts where the unicorn could only be captured by a virgin, reinforcing Christian allegories about purity and sacrifice. European nobles displayed unicorn horns in treasuries, believing they could detect poison or purify water. These horns, of course, were narwhal tusks, the long spiral tooth of an Arctic whale traded along medieval routes from Scandinavia. The confusion was profitable. A single narwhal tusk could be worth more than a castle, sold to credulous royalty as proof that unicorns existed. The blending of real natural object with mythical beast shows how powerfully people wanted to believe, and how trade networks could sustain elaborate fictions for centuries. 4. The Wendigo of Algonquian-speaking peoples is both a monster and a cultural warning. Stories associated with cannibalism, insatiable greed, and winters of famine used to teach community ethics. In harsh northern climates where winters could trap communities for months without resupply, the Wendigo represented the ultimate taboo, turning on your own people to survive. Described as gaunt, towering, with a heart of ice, the Wendigo was said to grow larger with each victim it consumed, never satisfied. But this wasn't just a campfire story. It was a psychological safeguard. Anthropologists note that Wendigo legends reinforced sharing, discouraged hoarding, and maintained social cohesion when resources were scarce. To become Wendigo-like, selfish, insatiable, willing to harm others for personal gain was to be cast out from the moral community. The creature embodied collective anxiety about survival and the thin line between human and monstrous behavior when pushed to extremes. 5. The Japanese yokai called kitsune are fox spirits, said to grow extra tails and gain magical abilities with age. In some tales, they become wise guardians. In others, sly tricksters. Kitsune legends reflect Japan's complex relationship with foxes, animals that lived on the edges of human settlements, neither fully wild nor domesticated. A kitsune could have up to 9 tails, each representing centuries of life and accumulated power. These spirits could shape-shift into beautiful women, possess humans, or serve as messengers for the Inari deity of rice and prosperity. Some kitsune protected shrines and brought good fortune. Others played cruel tricks on travelers or led people astray with ghostly fires. The duality captures something essential about yokai generally. They're not purely good or evil, but liminal beings that test human judgment and humility. Kitsune remain deeply embedded in Japanese popular culture, appearing in everything from ancient scroll paintings to modern anime, a testament to their enduring symbolic power. 6. The Basque Basajaun, Lord of the Woods, has parallels with European wildman tales, possibly reflecting pre-Indo-European nature deity memories. The Basque people of northern Spain and southern France speak a language unrelated to any other known tongue, suggesting deep roots predating Indo-European migrations. Their Basajaun legend describes a large, hairy, humanoid being who dwells in caves and forests, protects flocks from wolves, and taught early humans agriculture and metalworking. Unlike most wild man figures, Basajaun isn't threatening to those who respect his domain. He warns shepherds of approaching storms with whistles and howls and becomes angry only when forests are disrespected. Some folklorists suggest Basajaun preserves memories of pre-agricultural peoples who retreated to mountains as farming communities expanded, or even older deity figures from pre-Christian Basque religion. The figure shares traits with other European wildfolk, the Italian Silvanus, Germanic Woodwoses, Slavic Leshies, suggesting a common ancient stratum of forest god belief beneath later mythologies. Today, Basajaun appears in Basque cultural festivals and has been adopted as a symbol of environmental protection and indigenous identity, showing how ancient legendary creatures can gain new relevance in modern ecological and cultural movements. 7. In West Africa, the Mami Wata figure mixes mermaid traits with sacred water spirit worship and became entwined with both pre-colonial deities and post-contact cultural forms. Mami Wata, Mother Water, is both ancient and modern, a fluid deity whose image has evolved through trade, colonialism, and globalization. Pre-colonial water spirits were already important in West African religions, governing rivers, lakes, and the sea. When European sailors and traders brought images of mermaids, these were absorbed and reinterpreted. Mami Wata is often depicted as a beautiful woman, sometimes with a fishtail, holding mirrors or snakes, associated with wealth, sexuality, fertility, and danger. Her worship spread across the African diaspora, adapting to local contexts in the Caribbean and Americas. She represents both the power of water and the complexity of cultural exchange, a goddess who defies simple categorization, embodying the hybrid, syncretic nature of lived religion in a connected world. 8. The phoenix, a bird that cyclically burns and is reborn from its ashes, appears across Mediterranean and Near Eastern traditions as a symbol of renewal, including in Egyptian and later Greco-Roman lore. The phoenix legend seems to have originated in ancient Egypt, possibly inspired by the Bennu bird associated with the sun god Ra and the annual flooding of the Nile, a natural cycle of destruction and rebirth. Greek and Roman writers adopted and elaborated the myth, describing a magnificent bird that lived for 500 years before building a nest of aromatic wood, igniting it, and being consumed. From the ashes, a new phoenix would emerge. This powerful image of death and resurrection resonated across cultures, later adopted by early Christian writers as a symbol of Christ's resurrection and eternal life. The phoenix endures because it speaks to a universal human hope, that endings are not final, that from destruction can come new beginnings, and that transformation is always possible. 9. In many Pacific Islander traditions, shape-shifting tricksters, sometimes ocean spirits, explain both sudden storms at sea and the belief that some animals are people in disguise. Pacific Island cultures, spread across vast oceanic distances, developed rich mythologies where the boundary between human, animal, and spirit was permeable. Shapeshifters could be benevolent ancestors watching over their descendants, or mischievous beings testing human character. A dolphin might be a transformed chief. A seabird could carry a human soul. These stories weren't just entertainment. They encoded ecological knowledge, navigational wisdom, and social rules. If you mistreat an animal, you might be offending a spirit or ancestor. If a storm arises suddenly, perhaps you've angered an ocean deity. Shape-shifting myths created a world where everything was potentially animate and deserving of respect. A worldview that encouraged sustainable resource use and careful observation of the natural environment. The trickster figure, common across Polynesian, Micronesian, and Melanesian traditions, kept communities attentive and humble. 10. The Slavic domovoi is a house spirit. Treat it with respect. Leave bread and the household prospers. Anger it and pots break. An everyday spirit woven into domestic routines. Unlike grand mythological creatures, the domovoi was intimate and personal, a guardian of the hearth who lived behind the stove or in the cellar. Every household had one. These spirits were believed to be the souls of ancestors or primordial beings tied to the land. Families would leave offerings of bread, milk, or porridge and speak respectfully when entering or leaving the home. If the domovoi was pleased, animals stayed healthy, crops grew well, and the family thrived. If offended by neglect, rudeness, or moving without properly inviting the domovoi to come along, the spirit would create mischief. Objects would go missing, milk would sour, or worse. This belief system created a framework for domestic mindfulness and gratitude, turning daily household tasks into small rituals of respect. Even today, some Slavic households maintain these traditions, a living thread connecting modern life to ancient belief. 11. The Irish banshee is a female spirit whose wail foretells a family death, an example of folkloric grief ritual embedded in community memory. The word banshee comes from the Irish bean seed, meaning woman of the fairy mound. In traditional Irish belief, certain old families, particularly those of Gaelic nobility, had a banshee attached to their lineage. When death approached, the banshee would appear near the house, sometimes seen as a pale woman combing her hair, sometimes heard only as a piercing, mournful cry that carried across the countryside at night. This wasn't a malevolent spirit causing death, but rather a messenger announcing what was already fated. The banshee tradition served a psychological and social function, providing a framework for processing grief and loss within tight-knit communities. Hearing the wail meant families could prepare themselves emotionally and practically for what was coming. The persistence of banshee stories, even among Irish diaspora communities, shows how deeply death rituals and their attendant myths can embed themselves in cultural identity. 12. Many native Hawaiian Mo'o lizard myths combine large reptilian water spirits with genealogies and sacred places, blurring animal, deity, and landscape. In Hawaiian cosmology, Mo'o were powerful supernatural beings, often taking the form of enormous lizards or dragons who controlled bodies of water, streams, ponds, and irrigation channels. They were not simply monsters, but aumakua, ancestral guardians tied to specific families and locations. Some Mo'o were benevolent protectors, others were dangerous if disrespected. What makes Mo'o particularly fascinating is how they connect the physical landscape to human genealogy. Certain pools or waterfalls were known as the dwelling places of specific Mo'o, and families who could trace their lineage to these beings had both spiritual authority and practical control over water resources. This blending of mythology with land management encoded environmental knowledge into sacred narrative. Understanding Mo'o stories meant understanding where water came from, how it flowed, and who had rights to use it. Mythology as hydrology, genealogy as geography. 13. The African legend of the chimera. Like creature in some regions combines features of real predators to explain rare, frightening animal encounters, demonstrating how natural observation becomes myth. Across various African cultures, stories exist of composite beasts that merge lion, leopard, hyena, and serpent characteristics into single terrifying entities. These weren't arbitrary combinations. They reflected genuine ecological threats and the experience of encountering dangerous predators, especially at night or in unfamiliar territory. A shadowy figure with spots that moves like a cat, but sounds like something else might become, in retelling, a creature with a leopard's body and a hyena's laugh. Archaeological and ethnographic evidence suggests that such stories helped communities teach danger recognition to children and newcomers. By creating a mythical, super predator that embodied multiple real threats, the stories made abstract danger concrete and memorable. This pattern, taking real animals and exaggerating or combining their features, appears worldwide, showing how human cognition naturally mythologizes the environment through storytelling. 14. The Islamic jinn are spirit beings with free will in Quranic and pre-Islamic Arabian traditions. Many regional folk tales treat them like parallel societies with their own rules. Unlike angels who lack free will or demons who are purely malevolent, jinn occupy a complex middle space in Islamic theology and folklore. Created from smokeless fire, jinn are invisible to humans under normal circumstances but can interact with the physical world. They have families, cities, religions, some are Muslim, some are not, and hierarchies. Regional traditions elaborate extensively. Jinn can be helpful or harmful, bound or free, wise or foolish. In Arabian folklore, Solomon famously commanded jinn to build his temple. Across North Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, folk practices involve negotiating with jinn, offering them respect, avoiding their spaces at certain times, or seeking their aid through ritual. This rich tradition shows how a theological concept can become the basis for an entire parallel mythology, blending religious doctrine with pre-Islamic animism and continuous cultural creativity. 15. The native Amazonian duende or forest spirit often functions as a moral enforcer. Stories warn children and loggers to respect the forest, encoding conservation values in myth. In the dense, biodiverse forests of the Amazon basin, where hundreds of indigenous groups have lived for millennia, forest spirits serve as guardians of ecological balance. The duende is typically described as a small, childlike being who protects animals and punishes those who take too much or show disrespect. Kill more than you need, and the duende will lead you astray until you're hopelessly lost. Harm a sacred tree, and accidents will follow. These stories aren't primitive superstition. their sophisticated environmental management encoded in narrative form. By making the forest itself an active moral agent with supernatural enforcers, indigenous cultures created powerful disincentives against overhunting, waste, and destructive practices. Modern conservationists and anthropologists increasingly recognize that such myths often contain detailed ecological knowledge and have successfully protected biodiversity for centuries. The duende is both story and environmental ethic, entertainment and education rolled into one compelling figure. 16. European werewolf myths were sometimes used in medieval legal settings. Accused werewolves could face trials similar to humans, reflecting how myths intersected with law. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, hundreds of people across France, Germany, and other European regions were tried and executed for allegedly being werewolves. These weren't metaphorical accusations. Courts treated lycanthropy as a genuine crime, requiring evidence and testimony. Accusers claimed to have witnessed transformations or found human clothing near wolf attacks. The accused often confessed under torture to making pacts with the devil, transforming at night and killing livestock or people. These trials reveal the deadly intersection of folklore, religious anxiety, and social control. Werewolf accusations often targeted social outsiders, the mentally ill, the disabled, hermits, or those who violated community norms. The myth became a legal category, a way to prosecute difference and deviance. The trials eventually declined as Enlightenment rationalism took hold, but they left a legacy showing how powerfully mythology can shape institutions and how stories can literally become matters of life and death. 17. The Hindu concept of asuras shifted over time from nature spirits to antagonistic gods, reflecting changing cosmologies rather than fixed demons. In the earliest Vedic texts from ancient India, asuras were powerful divine beings, sometimes even superior to devas. Gods. The great god Varuna was called an asura. But over centuries, as Vedic religion evolved into classical Hinduism, the categories shifted. Asuras became opponents of devas, beings of immense power who challenged cosmic order, though not necessarily evil in the moral sense we might assume. They represent legitimate opposing forces, ambition, desire, strength used for selfish ends rather than dharmic purposes. Hindu epics are full of asuras who are learned, powerful, and even righteous according to their own principles, but whose goals conflict with universal harmony. This evolution from neutral or positive spirits to cosmic antagonists reveals how religious categories transform as society's values and structures change. The Asura-Deva conflict became a framework for thinking about power, desire, duty, and the constant struggle to maintain balance. Even in modern Hinduism, asuras aren't devils to be eliminated, but necessary opposing forces that make the cosmos dynamic rather than static. They lose eternally yet remain eternally present, embodying the idea that challenge and conflict are permanent features of existence, not problems to be solved, but tensions to be managed. 18. Aztec belief included feathered serpent deities like Quetzalcoatl, combining bird and snake imagery to symbolize sky and earth union, a cross-domain sacred hybrid. Quetzalcoatl was one of the most important gods in Mesoamerican religion, worshipped across many cultures before and during the Aztec Empire. The name translates roughly to feathered serpent, and images show a serpent covered in the brilliant green plumage of the Quetzal bird. This combination wasn't arbitrary. Snakes represented the earth, fertility, and the underworld. Birds represented the sky, wind, and celestial forces. By merging them, Quetzalcoatl embodied cosmic balance and the integration of opposing forces. He was credited with creating humanity, discovering corn, inventing the calendar, and teaching arts and civilization. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, some accounts claim the Aztecs initially mistook Hernán Cortés for the returning Quetzalcoatl, though modern historians debate this. What's undeniable is that the feathered serpent remains one of the most recognizable symbols of pre-Columbian America, appearing in architecture, art, and modern Mexican identity as a symbol of indigenous heritage and cosmic wisdom. 19. In many Inuit tales, the mischievous Tupilak, spirit-created being, was a constructed avenger materialized by shamans, a social explanation for unexplained misfortune. The Tupilak tradition is particularly fascinating because it involves the deliberate creation of a monster rather than encountering one in nature. According to Inuit belief, if someone felt deeply wronged and traditional justice mechanisms failed, they could consult a shaman to create a Tupilak. The shaman would secretly assemble a creature from animal bones, hair, and other materials, animating it through ritual to hunt down the enemy. The Tupilak would travel invisibly through water or across ice to kill or harm its target. However, there was a catch. If the intended victim had stronger spiritual protection or discovered the attack, they could turn the Tupilak back on its creator. This created a supernatural deterrent system. The threat of a boomeranging Tupilak discouraged frivolous or unjust revenge, while providing a narrative framework for unexpected deaths or accidents in the harsh Arctic environment. The Tupilak appears frequently in Greenlandic art today, transformed from fearsome spirit into cultural symbol. 20. In Norse mythology, Jörmungandr, the world serpent, is said to encircle the entire earth and bite its own tail, a cosmic symbol of cycles later echoed in European alchemical imagery. Jörmungandr was one of 3 monstrous children born to the trickster god Loki and the giantess Angerboda. Odin threw the serpent into the ocean surrounding Midgard, the human world, where it grew so enormous that it could wrap around the entire planet and grasp its own tail. This Ouroboros image, the serpent eating its tail, became a powerful symbol of eternity, cyclical time, and cosmic unity. Norse mythology prophesied that during Ragnarok, the end of the world, Jörmungandr would release its tail, rise from the ocean, and battle Thor in mutual destruction. The myth captured Norse anxieties about the fragility of cosmic order and the inevitability of chaos returning. Later, European alchemists adopted the Ouroboros symbol, seeing in it the unity of opposites, the cycle of death and rebirth, and the closed system of Hermetic philosophy. What began as a Norse apocalypse myth became a fundamental symbol of transformation, appearing in psychology, philosophy, and esoteric traditions across centuries. 21. The basilisk, a legendary serpent said to kill with a glance, probably merged real venomous snake lore with medieval mirror symbolism. People carried roosters to hunt it in bestiaries. Medieval Europeans described the basilisk as the king of serpents, born from a rooster's egg incubated by a toad or snake, already a biological impossibility that signaled its supernatural origin. Its gaze alone could kill, and its breath withered plants and cracked stones. This creature combined genuine fear of venomous snakes with allegorical thinking about sight, evil, and corruption. Medieval bestiaries recommended using mirrors against basilisks, reflecting their deadly gaze back upon themselves, a metaphor for sin destroying itself when confronted with truth. The rooster connection was equally symbolic. Roosters announced dawn, driving away darkness, so naturally they'd be the basilisk's enemy. These elaborate mythologies weren't just fantasy, they were teaching tools, helping medieval people organize their understanding of danger, morality, and the natural world into memorable narratives. The basilisk appears throughout European art, literature, and heraldry, evolving from fearsome monster into a symbol of self-destruction and the power of reflection. 22. The Greek sirens, often conflated with mermaids, were originally bird women whose songs lured sailors. Their form shifted over centuries from bird-like to aquatic. In Homer's Odyssey, sirens were dangerous creatures inhabiting rocky islands, singing so beautifully that sailors would crash their ships trying to reach them. Early Greek art depicts them as birds with women's heads, sometimes shown with musical instruments. They were associated with death and the transition between life and the afterlife, their songs representing forbidden knowledge or the seductive call of oblivion. Over time, perhaps influenced by other water spirit traditions, sirens gradually transformed in European imagination into the fish-tailed mermaids we recognize today. This shift reflects changing cultural anxieties and the way myths evolve as they move between cultures. Medieval Christian writers used sirens as symbols of worldly temptation, leading souls astray. By the Renaissance, the bird features had largely disappeared, replaced by the now familiar mermaid form. This metamorphosis shows how mythological creatures are never fixed. They adapt to the needs and fears of each generation, maintaining their symbolic power while changing their shape. 23. The Barong of Balinese mythology, a lion-like guardian spirit, embodies protective energy in ritual dance performances, still enacted to maintain balance between good and evil. In Bali, the Barong is not just a mythological creature, but a living presence in religious practice. Depicted as a massive, ornate lion or boar-like being with bulging eyes, elaborate costume, and fierce demeanor, the Barong represents positive forces, protection, and the stability of the village. The most famous ritual is the Barong dance, where the Barong battles Rangda, the demon queen, in an eternal struggle between good and evil that neither side can permanently win. This performance isn't theater in the Western sense, it's a sacred ritual meant to maintain cosmic balance. Dancers sometimes enter trance states, and the community believes the actual spiritual forces manifest during the performance. The Barong appears during major ceremonies, temple anniversaries, and times of village crisis, reassuring people that protective powers are active. This tradition shows how mythological creatures can remain vibrant and functional in modern religious life, not as ancient history, but as present spiritual technology. 24. The Romani folklore figure of the Baba Yaga, hut on chicken legs, blends Slavic, Finno-Ugric, and Indo-European elements, and often serves as an ambiguous trickster, mentor in tales. Baba Yaga is one of the most recognizable figures in Eastern European folklore, an ancient witch who lives in a house that stands on chicken legs and can spin around or walk through forests. She flies in a giant mortar, using the pestle to steer and a broom to sweep away her tracks. Her character is deeply ambiguous. Sometimes she devours children, sometimes she gives life-saving advice to heroes, sometimes she simply tests the worthiness of those who seek her out. This complexity reflects her roots in very old pre-Christian mythologies, where spirits and deities were not neatly good or evil. Scholars trace influences from Slavic death goddesses, Finno-Ugric shamanic traditions, and Indo-European witch figures. Baba Yaga stories teach that wisdom often comes from unexpected, frightening sources, and that respecting the unknown, even when it seems monstrous, can lead to aid. She represents the power of the forest, the wild, and the feminine force that exists outside social order, yet remains essential to it. 25. Hindu and Buddhist Garuda, a giant bird that eats snakes, symbolically represents the triumph of sky divine order over chthonic serpent forces across South and Southeast Asia. Garuda appears as a massive eagle-like being, often depicted with golden feathers, sometimes with a human-like torso and bird head and talons. In Hindu mythology, Garuda is the mount of Vishnu, one of the principal deities, and the sworn enemy of Naga serpents. This enmity isn't random, it represents the cosmic struggle between heavenly forces and earthly underworld powers. In practical terms, real eagles do hunt snakes, so the myth builds on observable nature while elevating it to cosmic significance. Garuda worship spread with Hinduism and Buddhism across Southeast Asia, becoming national symbols in Indonesia and Thailand. Temples feature Garuda iconography as protective guardians, and royal regalia often incorporates Garuda imagery to claim divine authority. The bird's ability to soar above the earth while dominating serpentine chaos made it a perfect symbol for rulers who sought to portray themselves as maintaining cosmic order. The persistence of Garuda imagery across millennia and cultures demonstrates how certain symbolic oppositions, sky versus earth, order versus chaos, remain compelling across human societies. 26. The idea of little people in Appalachian U.S. folklore, e.g., the Mogollon monster or little people tales, shows adaptive transmission of older European myths into New World settings. When European settlers moved to Appalachian mountains, they brought fairy and dwarf legends from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Germany. These stories adapted to the new landscape. Cherokee and other Native American tribes already had their own traditions of small supernatural beings, the Yunwi Tsunsti, little people, who lived in rocky areas and could help or harm depending on how they were treated. The meeting of European and indigenous small folk traditions created hybrid American versions. Appalachian little people dwell in caves and mountainsides, sometimes help lost children, sometimes steal objects, and demand respect for natural places, traits drawn from both cultural sources. The stories served similar functions in the New World as in the Old, explaining missing items, teaching children to avoid dangerous areas, enforcing community norms, and maintaining connection to landscape and tradition in an unfamiliar environment. This adaptive transmission shows how legendary creatures travel with migrating populations, but transform to fit new contexts, absorbing local features and merging with indigenous traditions to create distinctly American supernatural beings that feel both familiar and native to their new landscape. 27. The Japanese kappa, a water imp who loves cucumbers, was used to warn children about drowning and to explain unexplained water deaths in origin stories. Kappa are among the most distinctive yokai in Japanese folklore. Humanoid turtle-like creatures with webbed hands and feet, a beak-like mouth, and a water-filled depression on top of their heads that holds their life force. They inhabit rivers, ponds, and streams, and are known for being both mischievous and dangerous. Kappa supposedly enjoy pulling people underwater by their shirikodama, a mythical organ located in the anus, a grotesque detail that made the stories memorable to children. However, kappa also have weaknesses. They're obsessed with politeness and will bow if greeted properly, spilling the water from their head plates and rendering them powerless. They love cucumbers, which is why some Japanese still throw cucumber offerings into rivers or write family names on cucumbers as protective offerings. The kappa myth served a practical function in agricultural villages where children played near irrigation channels and rice paddies. By creating a specific, memorable monster, parents gave abstract danger a face, making safety lessons stick. The tradition continues today, with kappa appearing in children's media and tourism. 28. Central Asian Ouroboros-like snake imagery predates many empires, symbolizing cyclical time. Archaeologists find it on Bronze Age artifacts linking ancient Eurasian cultures. The image of a serpent consuming its own tail appears in archaeological sites across Central Asia dating back over 3,000 years. Long before written records explain its meaning. Found on pottery, metalwork, and stone carvings from cultures spanning from the steppes to early Mesopotamian civilizations, the circular serpent seems to have carried profound symbolic weight about cycles, eternity, and self-renewal. Different cultures likely developed this symbol independently, But trade routes across Central Asia facilitated the spread of the image and perhaps some shared understanding of its meaning. Later civilizations, Greek, Egyptian, Norse, would develop elaborate mythologies around serpents and cycles. But the archaeological evidence suggests the core symbolism is even older, emerging from Bronze Age peoples trying to represent concepts like the year's seasons, life-death-rebirth cycles, or cosmic time that has no beginning or end. These ancient artifacts remind us that some symbolic languages predate literacy, and that our ancestors were engaging with abstract philosophical concepts far earlier than we often assume. 29. The Native American thunderbird motif is both a storm personifying giant bird and a clan symbol. European settlers misinterpreted it as literal monsters in some early accounts. Across many Native American cultures from the Pacific Northwest to the Great Plains, thunderbird traditions describe enormous birds whose wing beats create thunder and whose eyes flash lightning. These beings controlled weather, particularly storms, and were treated as powerful spirits deserving respect and sometimes fear. Thunderbirds appear prominently in clan totems, ceremonial regalia, and origin stories, serving as symbols of strength, protection, and connection to sky powers. When European colonizers encountered these traditions, they often took them literally, recording evidence of giant predatory birds and searching for physical remains. This misunderstanding reflected a fundamental cultural gap. Many European traditions had long since literalized their myths into fixed stories, while many Native American traditions maintained living, adaptive relationships with mythological beings that blurred symbolic and literal categories. The Thunderbird wasn't simply a story about a big bird. It was a way of understanding weather patterns, a social identity marker, and a spiritual relationship with the powerful forces that shaped daily life on the Great Plains and coastal regions. 30. The medieval European dragon-slaying motif often served as political allegory. Rulers used saintly dragon slayers in propaganda to legitimize authority. The most famous dragon slayer is Saint George, whose legend became central to Christian knighthood and English national identity. In the story, George rescues a princess by slaying a dragon terrorizing a town, but the historical reality is murkier. The earliest versions of the story don't include dragons at all. The dragon was added later, during the medieval period, when Christian authorities were consolidating power and wanted clear symbols of triumph over paganism and chaos. Dragons represented everything Christianity sought to overcome: hoarding wealth instead of sharing, living in isolated caves instead of communities, embodying raw power without moral restraint. By showing saints and knights defeating dragons, medieval art and literature made a political statement. Legitimate Christian authority conquers chaotic, pre-Christian forces. Rulers commissioned dragon-slaying imagery for their seals, coins, and monuments, linking themselves to this symbolic victory. The motif was so effective that variations appear across Europe, each region claiming its own dragon slayer hero whose triumph justified contemporary power structures. 31. In Yoruba cosmology, some Orishas deities have animal forms or companions that became legendary creatures in local stories, illustrating syncretic identity across belief systems. The Yoruba religious tradition, originating in West Africa and spreading through the African diaspora during the slave trade, features hundreds of Orishas, divine beings who govern natural forces, human endeavors, and moral principles. Many Orishas are associated with specific animals that serve as their symbols or messengers. Oshun, goddess of rivers and love, is connected to peacocks and vultures. Ogun, god of iron and war, has connections to dogs. These associations aren't arbitrary. They reflect observed animal behaviors and ecological relationships that made them apt symbols for divine forces. As Yoruba religion evolved and mixed with Catholicism in the Caribbean and Brazil, becoming Santeria and Candomblé, these animal companions sometimes took on lives of their own in local folklore, becoming legendary creatures in stories told alongside religious practice. This syncretism shows how mythological creatures emerge at the intersection of different cultural systems, adapting and transforming as people find new ways to express old spiritual truths in changing circumstances. The living nature of these traditions means new legendary creatures can still emerge today. 32. Australian Aboriginal Wandjina and rainbow serpent stories encode climate memory, creation narratives that reflect flooding and resource patterns across millennia. Aboriginal Australian cultures are among the oldest continuous traditions on Earth, with oral histories stretching back tens of thousands of years. The rainbow serpent is a creator being found across many Aboriginal groups, associated with water, rain, and the formation of rivers and waterholes. Wandjina are ancestral sky beings depicted in rock art throughout northwest Australia. Recent research suggests these mythological narratives may preserve actual memories of geological events, specifically the end of the last ice age, when rising seas flooded coastal areas and created new waterways. Stories describe ancestral beings creating the landscape in ways that align with known flooding patterns from 10 to 12,000 years ago. This isn't metaphor or coincidence. It's evidence that oral traditions, when maintained carefully, can preserve information across timescales that exceed written history. The creatures in these stories aren't just spiritual symbols. They're mnemonic devices encoding environmental knowledge, teaching each generation where water can be found in drought, how rivers formed, and where resources concentrate. Western science is only now beginning to appreciate the sophistication of this knowledge system. 33. The Celtic Puka. Puka is a shape-shifting creature that can bring both good harvests and mischief, showing how dual nature spirits help communities think about luck and risk. The puka appears throughout Irish and Welsh folklore as a fundamentally unpredictable being. It can take many forms: a black horse, a goat, a rabbit, or even a handsome young man, and its mood determines whether encounters bring fortune or disaster. A puka might help with farm work overnight, leaving fields mysteriously plowed by morning, or it might lead travelers astray into bogs. Farmers traditionally left a portion of their harvest in the field for the puka, a practice that ensured some grain remained for wild animals and prevented complete crop exhaustion. This custom shows how folklore reinforced sustainable agricultural practices. The puka's dual nature also provided a framework for understanding uncertainty. Not everything can be controlled, and the same forces that bring prosperity can bring ruin. This wasn't primitive thinking. It was sophisticated acknowledgement of chance, weather, and ecological complexity. The puka taught humility and pragmatism, encouraging people to prepare for reversals while remaining open to unexpected luck. Such spirits made randomness manageable by giving it personality and rules of engagement. 34. Many sea serpent reports from the age of sail map closely to migration routes of large whales and wave-borne debris. Sailors personified rare marine phenomena as monsters. During the 15th through 19th centuries, European ships crisscrossed the world's oceans, and captains' logs and sailors' accounts filled with sightings of enormous serpents undulating through distant waves. When plotted on maps, these sightings cluster along known whale migration routes, particularly where rorquals, fin, blue, and humpback whales surface in sequence, creating the illusion of a segmented body moving through water. Add to this the occasional floating tree trunk, tangles of seaweed, or schools of fish creating ripples, and you have a perfect recipe for monster reports. Sailors had no biological knowledge of marine mammals as large as blue whales, which can exceed 100 feet in length. Seeing such creatures in poor visibility, Exhausted from night watches, their minds would fill gaps with sea serpent narratives already present in European mythology. These weren't hallucinations or lies. They were honest attempts to interpret genuinely strange experiences using the cognitive tools available. The persistence of sea serpent legends shows how human pattern recognition, combined with fragmentary observation, reliably produces mythological creatures even when natural explanations exist. 35. The medieval concept of the wild man. Woodwoes may preserve collective memories of feral humans or marginalized figures, used in art to explore the boundary between civilization and nature. Throughout medieval European art, literature, and heraldry, the wild man appears, a hairy, often naked figure living in forests, representing untamed human nature. Sometimes depicted as violent and dangerous, sometimes as noble and free, the wild man occupied cultural space between human and animal. Some scholars suggest these figures preserve folk memories of people who lived outside feudal society, hermits, outcasts, those who fled into forests to escape serfdom or law. Others point to possible encounters with Neanderthal populations, though that's more speculative. What's clear is that wild men served a psychological function, allowing medieval people to think about what they might become without civilization's constraints, or conversely, what they'd lost by accepting those constraints. The wild man appeared on churches, town halls, and noble crests, sometimes as a warning, sometimes as a symbol of strength and independence. This ambivalence reflects genuine medieval anxieties about the thin line between order and chaos, cultivation and wilderness, sanctity and savagery. The wild man was civilization's shadow self, never quite monster or human, always in between. 36. In many cultures, half-human prophets or shamans who become beasts in trance, shapeshifters represent ritualized access to non-human knowledge rather than literal animal transformation. Across Siberian, Native American, African, and other shamanic traditions, spiritual specialists claim the ability to transform into animals, bears, eagles, jaguars, wolves, during ritual trances. Modern observers debate whether practitioners really believed they transformed or understood it as spiritual metaphor. But this distinction misses the point. The transformation ritual provided a framework for accessing knowledge, perspectives, and power attributed to animals. By becoming a bear, the shaman gained the bear's strength and wisdom. By becoming an eagle, they achieved the bird's far-seeing vision. These transformations typically involved elaborate preparation, fasting, isolation, consumption of psychoactive plants, rhythmic drumming, and wearing animal skins or masks. The altered state induced by these practices felt genuinely transformative to participants. When a shaman in eagle form flew to the spirit world to retrieve a lost soul or diagnose illness, the community accepted this as real travel, real knowledge gained. The shape-shifting shaman shows how legendary creatures aren't always external beings, but roles humans can temporarily occupy, accessing animal powers through ritual technology. This makes transformation stories not about biology, but about epistemology, how to know what animals know, how to see what they see, how to harness what they represent. 37. In Maori tradition, taniwha are protective or dangerous water beings. Contemporary legal cases in New Zealand sometimes reference taniwha when discussing sacred sites. Taniwha are supernatural creatures in Maori belief, inhabiting deep pools, caves, rivers, and coastal waters. Each iwi, tribe, and hepu, sub-tribe, has knowledge of specific taniwha associated with their territories. These beings can be ancestors in spiritual form or independent entities. Some protect travelers, others must be appeased before crossing their domain. The taniwha tradition encodes detailed geographical and ecological knowledge, dangerous currents, unstable riverbanks, places where people have drowned, all marked by the presence of a taniwha. In modern New Zealand, taniwha have entered legal and political discourse. When roads or developments threaten sites known to have taniwha, Maori communities can invoke their presence in legal proceedings, as these locations are considered taonga, treasures protected under the Treaty of Waitangi. This isn't superstition entering law. It's recognition that indigenous knowledge systems preserved through mythology contain valid information about sacred sites, ecosystems, and cultural heritage. Western observers sometimes mock these references, but they represent a sophisticated integration of myth, law, and environmental protection that predates modern conservation by centuries. 38. Medieval bestiaries fused real and imaginary animals to teach moral lessons. For example, pelican lore. Mother Pierce's breast to feed young became a Christian allegory for sacrifice. Medieval bestiaries weren't meant to be accurate natural history in the modern sense. They were moral encyclopedias using animals, real and legendary, to teach Christian virtues and theology. The pelican myth illustrates this perfectly. Bestiaries claimed that when a mother pelican's young died, she would pierce her own breast with her beak, feeding them with her blood to revive them. This fact wasn't based on observation, but on the pelican's habit of storing fish in the pouch beneath its beak, which when pressed against its breast while feeding chicks could appear to be self-wounding. Medieval writers seized on this, making the pelican a symbol of Christ's sacrifice, giving life through blood, reviving the spiritually dead through self-sacrifice. Similar stories attached to lions, breathing life into stillborn cubs, phoenixes, resurrection, and unicorns, purity. These weren't mistakes. They were pedagogical tools for a largely illiterate population. Church art featured these creatures prominently, and sermons unpacked their meanings. The bestiary tradition shows how cultures organize knowledge not primarily by accuracy, but by meaning, creating a symbolic ecosystem where legendary creatures carry essential truths about human behavior and divine nature. 39. The Norse draugr, an undead creature guarding treasure, could explain Viking-era tomb disturbances found archaeologically and reflect anxieties about grave violation. In Norse mythology and saga literature, the draugr is a walking corpse, physically powerful and malevolent, that remains in its burial mound to guard treasure. Unlike modern zombies, draugr possess intelligence and supernatural abilities. They can increase their size, cause madness, or create storms. Archaeological evidence shows that Viking-era burial mounds were sometimes disturbed, with grave goods stolen and remains scattered. The draugr myth provided an explanation and deterrent. Disturb a grave, face supernatural vengeance. This served practical social functions. It protected inheritance, grave goods belonged to the family, maintained respect for ancestral remains, and discouraged tomb robbery in a culture where status items buried with the dead represented enormous wealth. The draugr also encoded psychological truths about guilt and transgression. Many saga accounts describe heroes forced to battle draugr after violating oaths or committing dishonorable acts, suggesting that the undead they faced might have been manifestations of guilty conscience. Whether spiritual warning or psychological metaphor, the draugr reveals how legendary creatures police boundaries between living and dead, honor and shame, yours and mine. 40. The Hindu Rakshasa are sometimes nature spirits and sometimes demons. Ancient Sanskrit epics use them for both political allegory and cosmic moral conflict. In Hindu mythology, Rakshasas are powerful beings with shape-shifting abilities, tremendous strength, and often cannibalistic appetites. They appear throughout sacred texts like the Ramayana and Mahabharata, sometimes as antagonists fighting against gods and heroes, sometimes as complex characters with their own motivations and even nobility. The epic Ramayana centers on the demon king Ravana, a Rakshasa of immense learning and power, whose abduction of Sita sets the story in motion. Yet Ravana is portrayed not as purely evil, but as a being who violated Dharma, cosmic order, through his actions. Some Rakshasas serve as protectors or converts to righteous paths. This complexity reflects the text's sophisticated moral thinking. Opposition to cosmic order can come from impressive, intelligent sources, and restoration of balance requires understanding, not just force. Politically, Rakshasas often represented outsider groups, rival kingdoms, or forces resisting Brahmanical orthodoxy. The term allowed epic poets to address political conflicts in mythological language. Today, Rakshasas remain powerful figures in South Asian culture, appearing in religious festivals, classical dance, and popular media as reminders that evil is often intelligent, attractive, and morally complex. 41. In Japan, Tengu are long-nosed mountain spirits who evolved from fearsome demons into protective kami, linked to martial practice and ascetic training. The Tengu's transformation across Japanese history is remarkable. Early Buddhist texts introduced Tengu as dangerous obstacles to enlightenment, bird-like demons who spread chaos and abducted monks. They were portrayed with beaks or impossibly long noses, red faces, and sometimes wings. Over centuries, as mountain Buddhism and Shinto traditions interacted, Tengu gradually changed. They became guardians of mountains and forests, protectors of sacred spaces, and teachers of martial arts. By the medieval period, samurai and warrior monks told stories of training under Tengu masters who taught superhuman sword techniques and strategy. The Tengu's long nose became a symbol of pride and supernatural insight. Mountain ascetics, Yamabushi, developed particularly close associations with Tengu, treating them as spiritual allies rather than enemies. This evolution from demon to deity shows how mythological creatures can completely reverse their moral violence as social needs and religious frameworks change. Modern Japan continues both traditions. Tengu masks appear in festivals as protective figures, while their old, mischievous reputation survives in folklore about arrogant or boastful people being Tengu-like. The creature adapted rather than disappeared. 42. The European chimera concept, hybrids stitched from lion, goat, and serpent elements, echoes real observation of unusual animal births and symbolic hybridity in art. The original chimera from Greek mythology was a specific monster: lion's head, goat's body emerging from its back, serpent for a tail, breathing fire and terrorizing the countryside until killed by the hero Bellerophon. But the term chimera expanded to mean any hybrid creature, and medieval Europe produced countless variations. These weren't pure fantasy. Farmers and shepherds occasionally witnessed congenital abnormalities: animals born with extra limbs, fused twins, severe mutations. Without modern biological understanding, these became evidence that nature could produce monsters. Add to this symbolic thinking. Combining animals represented combining their qualities. A griffin, lion-eagle merged terrestrial strength with aerial perspective, making it the perfect guardian. The chimera concept allowed artists and mythmakers to create visual language for complex ideas. Something both fierce and productive, lion-goat. Something earthly and divine, bull-angel. The creature building followed rules, making hybrids comprehensible rather than random chaos. This tradition of meaningful combination influenced heraldry, architecture, and eventually fantasy literature, creating a grammar of monsters that still shapes how we imagine impossible beings. 43. The Persian simurgh is a giant, benevolent bird whose cleansing of the world appears in Sufi texts as spiritual allegory, influencing later Middle Eastern art. The simurgh is one of the most beautiful creatures in Persian mythology. An enormous bird with colorful plumage, sometimes described with aspects of peacock, eagle, and dog, embodying both grace and power. It nests in the tree of knowledge, has lived countless lifetimes, and possesses infinite wisdom. Unlike many legendary birds that are neutral or dangerous, the simurgh is explicitly benevolent. It heals the wounded, purifies the earth, and in some versions gives rise to all birds. The most famous appearance comes from the 12th century poem The Conference of the Birds by Attar of Nishapur, where 30 birds, simurgh in Persian, a wordplay, seek the simurgh as their king, only to realize through their spiritual journey that they collectively are the simurgh, a Sufi parable about the soul's search for unity with the divine. This philosophical depth made the simurgh a favorite subject in Persian miniature paintings, textiles, and Islamic art across centuries. The creature represents the highest spiritual aspirations: wisdom without pride, power without cruelty, eternity without stagnation. Its continued presence in Iranian culture shows how legendary creatures can carry philosophical and religious meaning that transcends their narrative origins. 44. Many island cultures have dragon or serpent myths associated with volcanoes and lava flows, using creature imagery to explain geological violence. In Iceland, Indonesia, Hawaii, and other volcanic regions, folklore traditions describe enormous serpents, dragons, or fire spirits dwelling beneath the earth. These beings aren't arbitrary monsters. They're sophisticated explanations for volcanic activity developed by cultures living with regular geological upheaval. Hawaiian Pele, goddess of volcanoes, sometimes takes dragon-like forms or commands fire creatures as she moves underground. Icelandic legends place the great worm Nidhöggr beneath the earth, gnawing at the world tree's roots, causing earthquakes. Indonesian myths describe serpent kings whose movements create eruptions. These traditions encode practical knowledge: which mountains are dangerous, how to read warning signs before eruptions, where to flee when ground trembles. The creature metaphor made abstract geological processes tangible and memorable. A child taught that a sleeping dragon lives under a particular mountain will respect its danger and remember evacuation routes better than hearing geological instability creates eruption risk. Modern volcanologists working in indigenous communities have found that traditional serpent-dragon stories often align remarkably well with actual volcanic patterns, preserving centuries of observational wisdom in narrative form. 45. The Tikbalang of Philippine legend, a tall, horse-headed forest spirit, may have arisen from early encounters with horses brought by Spanish colonizers, reshaping pre-colonial trickster myths. Before Spanish arrival in the 16th century, the Philippines had no horses. The sudden appearance of these large, powerful animals, especially cavalry horses ridden by conquistadors, must have been shocking. The Tikbalang emerged in Filipino folklore as a creature that appears in forests and rural areas, standing 7 feet tall or more, with a horse's head and hooves, but a human-like body covered in coarse hair. It's a trickster that leads travelers astray, creates illusions, and guards particular trees and paths. If you can climb on its back and hold on through a wild ride, it becomes your ally. This captures several cultural experiences: the initial terror and strangeness of horses, the way colonial power rode in on horseback, and the adaptation of older nature spirit beliefs, like the pre-colonial duende, to incorporate this new element. The Tikbalang shows how colonization doesn't just suppress indigenous mythology, it transforms it, as people integrate new experiences into existing frameworks. The creature remains popular in Filipino culture today, adapted into films, comics, and urban legends, continuously evolving while maintaining its core identity as a forest spirit that tests and sometimes aids those who show courage. 46. The Greek centaur, half human, half horse, probably originated as a symbolic memory of mounted nomads or foreign cavalry seen by settled Greeks. When you've never seen a person riding a horse, the sight must have been staggering. Early Greek farmers and townspeople, encountering skilled horsemen from the Eurasian steppes, may have genuinely struggled to understand what they were seeing. From a distance, rider and horse could appear as one creature. Over time, this confusion crystallized into myth. Beings with human torsos and horse bodies, representing the wild, uncivilized other beyond Greek borders. Centaurs in mythology are often drunk, violent, and lustful, characteristics Greeks associated with barbarism. Yet figures like Chiron, the wise centaur, show that even within this framework, there was room for nobility and learning. The centaur myth encodes an entire historical moment, the shock of encountering a fundamentally different way of life and the process of turning that shock into story. 47. Japanese folk tales about yurei. Ghosts often reflect Edo period social stresses. Many stories pin death to unresolved social obligations rather than pure fright. Yurei are distinct from yokai in Japanese tradition. They are the spirits of dead humans who cannot move on due to powerful emotions or unfulfilled duties. Classic yurei stories from the Edo period, 1603–1868, reveal specific social anxieties. Oiwa, from the famous ghost story Yotsuya Kaidan, was murdered by her husband and returns for revenge, reflecting anxieties about domestic violence and women's powerlessness. Many yurei are women who died in childbirth, or servants who died in service, or those whose families didn't perform proper funeral rites. The recurring theme isn't supernatural horror for its own sake, but social dysfunction, obligations unfulfilled, relationships severed improperly, hierarchies violated. In a society structured around duty, obligation, and proper ritual, yurei represented the consequences of failure in these domains. They were less about fear of death itself and more about fear of dying without resolution, without completing one's role. This gave yurei stories tremendous psychological power. They enforced social norms by showing that even death wouldn't erase your responsibilities. The tradition continues in Japanese horror cinema, where ghosts consistently embody social rather than supernatural terror. 48. The Malay and Indonesian myth of the Garuda versus Naga battle maps onto seasonal flooding and dragon-serpent symbolism across Southeast Asia. Throughout Indonesia, Malaysia, and broader Southeast Asia, the cosmic battle between Garuda, the divine bird, and Naga. The serpent appears repeatedly in temple reliefs, dance performances, and origin stories. This isn't just borrowed Hindu mythology, it's been adapted to local environmental reality. The seasonal monsoons that bring life-giving floods also bring danger. Rivers overflow, fields disappear underwater, homes are destroyed. The Garuda-Naga conflict symbolizes this duality. Water, Naga, is necessary, but must be controlled or contested by sky powers, Garuda. Temple architecture often shows Garuda grasping Naga, literally positioned where water flows through ritual architecture, making the mythological conflict part of water management systems. Kings used Garuda imagery to claim they balanced these forces, controlling floods while ensuring adequate water. The battle is never permanently won by either side. It's eternal, cycling with the seasons. This makes the myth remarkably sophisticated as environmental metaphor, acknowledging that humans live between equally necessary opposing forces, sky and water, that must be balanced rather than defeated. The persistence of this imagery across centuries of Southeast Asian kingdoms shows how effectively it captured lived experience. 49. Some African forest spirits, described as horned, antlered beings, align with knowledge of forest fauna and ceremonial mask traditions that embody animal characteristics. Across Central and West African forest regions, spirits associated with deep wilderness are often described or depicted with antlers, horns, or animal features that reference forest antelopes, buffalo, and other ungulates. These aren't simply animal gods, but forest presences that embody the power, danger, and vitality of the deep bush where human settlements end. The ceremonial masks used in initiation rites, forest spirit societies, and seasonal festivals often incorporate actual animal materials, horns, hides, bones, transforming the wearer into a physical embodiment of these spirits. When masked dancers emerge from the forest during ceremonies, they're not actors playing roles. They're considered to be the spirits themselves, made manifest. This tradition reveals profound ecological knowledge, recognizing which animals dominate forest ecosystems, understanding their behaviors and territories, and encoding this knowledge in spiritual practice. The horned forest spirits also mark boundaries between village and wilderness, between human and animal, between settled and wild. They're reminders that the forest operates by its own rules, and humans who enter must show respect, knowledge, and caution. These traditions continue today, adapting to modern contexts while maintaining their core message about humanity's place within, not above, the natural world. 50. The Greek hydra's multiple heads in myth may symbolize natural hazards like swampy disease zones, many dangers where one goes to fight only to face more problems. The Hydra from Greek mythology dwelt in the swamps of Lerna, a multi-headed serpent-like monster that grew 2 heads for every one cut off, breathing poisonous fumes and possessing venomous blood. The hero Heracles defeated it only by cauterizing each neck stump before new heads could sprout. Modern analysis suggests the Hydra may represent the experience of fighting malaria and other swamp-borne diseases. Ancient Greeks understood that marshes caused sickness, though they didn't know about mosquitoes and pathogens. The Hydra captures the frustration of dealing with such illnesses. Attack one symptom, another emerges. Drain one marsh, disease appears elsewhere. The problem constantly multiplies. The cauterization solution, burning the stumps, parallels real ancient public health practice. Burning marshes, using fire to clear standing water. Some scholars also see the Hydra as a metaphor for any seemingly insurmountable problem that compounds with each attempted solution. The Hydra has become, in modern language, shorthand for multiplying problems. Cutting off the Hydra's head means addressing symptoms without solving root causes. This metaphorical persistence shows how effective the ancient myth was at capturing a genuine strategic dilemma. Some dangers require fundamentally different approaches than simple direct confrontation. And there you have it, 50 facts about legendary creatures across different cultures. These legendary beings aren't just entertainment from the past. They're sophisticated knowledge systems encoding environmental wisdom, social norms, psychological truths, and cultural memory. They mark boundaries between worlds, enforce community ethics, preserve historical experience, and make abstract concepts tangible. If you enjoyed exploring these remarkable beings with me tonight, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into fascinating topics. Drop a comment below with your favorite fact from this list. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, journeying through the world's legendary creatures. Until next time, keep your curiosity alive, and remember that every culture's monsters and marvels have something valuable to teach us about being human.